Guys, welcome to a special edition of the Anything But Everything podcast. Usually we're focusing on real life struggles and stuff like that, but today we got something different. Today we're talking about gaming in general, and we're just going to talk about the evolution of gaming, the platform and the art form that it has become. You know, a lot of people say that to whoever, was born, from like the 1980s to now, we are the generation of video games, where as opposed to prior generations, video games were actually not a non-existent thing. But I'm here today with, once again, a returning guest, my good friend Danny. Danny, how you doing?
Hello. I'm doing good. I can't complain.
So we're here to talk about gaming in general. Now, to you, when someone says gaming is not a real thing, it's not an art form, it's just something that people do for entertainment purposes.
I mean, I feel everyone has their own opinion on something, and they're entitled to that. Everyone has their own opinion. To me, I see it more than just entertainment. Yes, it is entertaining. Yes, it is fun. But there's so much effort that goes into it. It can be argued that it is an art form. It can be argued that it does rival movies in cinematic storytelling. In music, it can rival that it plays out even better than some soundtracks for films. So to me, it is more than just entertainment, but it does have that form as well. It is entertaining as hell.
I feel like definitely that, gaming now fills out all the criteria. If you want to talk about soundtracks, some of the most memorable, video game soundtracks, in the history of video games, I mean, a lot of people listen to video game soundtracks like on YouTube or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk about, shots and angles and how something is framed. I mean, game developers pay close attention to that. Dynamic characters, dynamic storylines, the whole 9 yards, especially now with graphics.
Oh, yeah. Graphics play a big play into it because it gives a more realistic character to focus on. And I'm not going to shoot and say, oh, video games are the best thing in the world, because of course they're not. There's other things in the world that are more important. But it can be argued, and again, this is just my opinion, I feel with a video game, you get more invested in it compared to a movie, because you're actually playing that character.
You're controlling.
Exactly. You're physically controlling and making that character do things. So it is like a movie, yes, but it's more interactive.
When did you get introduced to the video game scene? What was your first console?
My first console, I clearly remember it, was a Nintendo 64.
There you go.
I was
favorite game.
Ooh, that's tough.
On the N64.
Easy Super Mario 64.
So N64 was your introduction to video games.
N64 was, give or take, right around my introduction to video games. Because I have my older cousins, they had the Super Nintendo before the Nintendo 64.
Before, yeah.
And the original, NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Right.
So I knew what they were, but I didn't have a full concept of it.
Right.
And then I remember my mom and my brother walking up into the driveway, and my brother holding the big Nintendo box. And I was thinking, what the hell is that? And then we sat down and we played Mario, and I was like, oh my god, this is awesome.
You were hooked.
I was hooked, yeah. From there I fell in love with it. And to see the evolution of it go from what I grew up playing, what my parents grew up playing, Pac-Man, Mrs. Pac-Man, Galaga, Atari games, seeing my parents go from that to what I play now is such a huge jump, and it just shocks me.
I feel like because, if you're a gamer who's been slowly keeping up with, the Nintendo 64s, and for me, my introduction was the Sega Genesis.
Okay.
Mortal Kombat, Streets of Rage, Sonic the Hedgehog, whole 9 yards. But if you're one who, has kept up with it, you see that little evolution, but it's like when you kind of step back and you compare a game from today all the way from a game from I'd say, 1995 or whatever, you truly see that big jump. But let me ask you this. What would be the one game where you would say, even though it was developed back then in the 90s or early 2000s, it still holds up to any video game that you play today?
That's a tough selection because there's a lot of games out there.
For me, I'm going to say right now, Goldeneye. If you want to talk about soundtrack, Goldeneye was, it filled that criteria. If you want to talk about graphics, not the best ones in the world, but still pretty good. The multiplayer, which introduced and I believe kind of revolutionized Call of Duty.
Oh yeah, it was one of the best 3D, because that's their big jump. They went from the Super Nintendo, which was all 16
2D, yeah,
it was 16-bit, to the Nintendo 64, which went to 64-bit.
Yeah,
that's where it got the name. That's where 3D gaming really became a big thing. So to see Goldeneye as a big stepping stone for games like Call of Duty or Halo or Battlefield, I could completely agree to that, because it really was a huge stepping stone that catalyzed a lot of shooting games that we play now.
And did you have a personal one where you feel like it holds up to today's games? No matter when you played it, in your life, you feel like this is gonna hold up.
You know what? Actually, yeah, and it's actually older than the Nintendo 64. I would have to say is Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. The reason why I say that is because it had a story to it. It had fun gameplay. It had interesting levels, interesting characters. And even though, it was all 8-bit or 16-bit, and, its sound wasn't as good as, what we're used to now,
yeah,
it still had a catchy soundtrack. It still had, music that to this day you can go back and listen to it and you're like, yeah, this is pretty catchy, and, bob your head to it. So, yeah, I can honestly say there are still some games out there that are older that you look back at them now and you can still say, this is a good game.
Now, in regards to, so we've talked about the games from back then and yesteryear, but as far as the consoles and the video games of now, what is the one thing that you feel like they're doing such a good job at, and one of the things where you feel like, they still gotta, there's that one little thing that they still gotta get right? What is it?
In all honesty, yeah. And it revolves around a lot of shooting games. Call of Duty, for me, is one of those games. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a good game, but it's a very repetitive game. There's nothing that different from, the newest one, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, compared to the one before it, I think, which was Advanced Warfare, or whatever it was.
Before that, Black Ops.
And then before that, Black Ops 3, and so on and so forth. They do innovate it, they do change it up a little bit from here and there, but if you go back to last year's Call of Duty and compare it to this year's, it's not that much different gameplay-wise. The controls are still genuinely the same. The guns are still pretty similar as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it gets
repetitive.
Exactly. It gets repetitive, and it can be improved.
So, and on the contrary, what's the one thing where you feel like every new game that does come out, whether it's in a franchise or just a standalone game, where you feel like, ooh, they did some really good work on this?
One of my favorite things, I would have to say, is story.
Yeah, storyline. Because
there are some games that have overarching stories that branch from one game to another. So it has X amount of sequels. Halo, for example, Halo has so many sequels to the point where they have spin-off games. Halo Reach, Halo ODST, Halo Wars 1 and 2, where those are not necessarily part of the main story, but they're still in the same universe. Same thing with, I'm trying to think of another one, Uncharted. Another good game. It's overarching. It starts off as Drake being, this almost Tomb Raider treasure hunter guy, to the last game, Thief's End. Where he's trying to retire, but his brother comes back and brings him back into it. So story for me is a very important thing. If it doesn't have a good story, it just kind of dies out and gets forgotten. And music is another very important thing as well.
Definitely. You go back and you think, and I think also one of the things, this might sound a little cliche, but like the lure of adventure. I feel like if the levels in a game are they're very parallel, they're almost the same thing, I lose interest. 2 examples. We were just talking about Uncharted, Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3. Especially, Uncharted 4 was great, and there's an adventure there, but I still feel like the dominant game in the series is Uncharted 3.
That's what I've heard a lot of people say, actually. I've heard a lot of people say that Uncharted 3 was their peak, was the pinnacle, was their best effort up to the point.
Graphics-wise and mechanics, yeah, Uncharted 4 has them all beaten, no matter what you say.
Uncharted 4 looks beautiful.
But Uncharted 3, I just feel like, you had the one scene with the desert. is so beautiful because Drake's he's all alone, he's isolated. There's like almost no hope. He starts hallucinating, and just the graphics and the soundtrack that just adds on to it. It's just so beautiful. So, what's your favorite console to date?
To date? Ooh, that's tough. If I have to pick a favorite, I would probably pick an Xbox 360. The reason why is because that's really where I got into online gaming. And, I had that very fun community with my brother. We would play a lot, and we'd play co-op games online.
Right.
And I would play with my cousins who live in San Francisco, and it gave me a chance to spend time with them online and communicate. And,
talking on the headsets.
Yeah, talking on the headsets and just chit-chatting. It didn't even necessarily have to be about the game. We could just be, hey, dude, how was your day today? We'd be playing the game and just be talking about ourselves in general. So, I had a lot of fun memories with it. I had a lot of really fun experiences on those games and things like that. So I would have to pick a 360 just because of my experience with it. Not to knock any other system, that's just my opinion.
I'd say that for me it was the PS4. One thing I feel like they did is that now you can record your last 15 minutes of gameplay, edit it down, convert it, and just upload it online.
Yeah, Xbox One does the same thing now.
Do the same thing, yeah, and just like all this, like the small features, like you got YouTube, you got your Netflix. It's like it's like more than an entertainment system. It's more than a video game system now. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's just a few components shy of a computer almost.
I mean, they got the VR now with it. Think about how crazy that is.
Oh yeah, that's just unbelievable. And I mean, with technology advancing the way it is, it's only going to be a matter of time until full virtual reality games are going to be immersive, where it's going to be something like you see in a movie where they put on a headset and the guy is teleported into a video game.
Yeah.
It's only going to be a matter of time. We might not get to that extent, but we're going to get closer and closer to it. So that's just something that interests me. That sounds really interesting to see how much more can we evolve with this franchise, or how much more can we evolve with this medium, should I say?
Right. I feel like now they're, especially like the platform of the console. At first it was this big square rectangular-ish thing and a big controller. Now it's like you look at the Wii U and the Switch, and now it's like the dynamic of that is just changing.
Yeah,
it's actually becoming smaller, and you have like things you got to like put around your hands, and you got to like actually
motion controllers.
Exactly.
And things like that.
Yeah. So the evolution is definitely there for it, but. All right, so favorite video game of all time.
Of all time, that
just one. I don't want to hear. I got 3. I got 4. I got 10. One.
You know what? If I had to pick one, it would probably World of Warcraft.
Why is that?
Because I've been playing World of Warcraft before it was World of Warcraft. I played Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, and the expansion. And I remember playing those growing up with my cousin and my brother, playing those on PC. And they were really fun and they were really interesting. And then when they announced, World of Warcraft, this huge open world, you control one character instead of a whole army.
Yeah.
It made it feel more personal. Because with the previous games in the franchise, you're controlling a whole army. With this, you're just controlling one person. So I really liked that. It was really interesting to me. And to this day, I still play it. I've been playing the game easy 7 years, 8 years, on and off. I've been playing the same character. Like, I remember starting him back in middle school.
Yeah.
And then when I hit the highest level you can hit at the time, which was, I think, 85, I was so excited. I was like, yeah, I hit 85. And I remember all my friends that I was playing with at the time, they were like, so? Because they had like 10 or 12 characters that were maxed out.
Yeah.
And for me, I was so excited because, it took me 7 years to get this.
Yeah.
So I was super excited about that. So I would say World of Warcraft.
I hear that World of Warcraft. You know what I think of? That YouTube video of the greatest freak out ever.
Oh, God. Please.
The guy's mom cancels a World of Warcraft subscription and he goes insane. So I'm going to throw mine out there. My favorite game, beyond a shadow of a doubt, would be The Last of Us. Great game. Anybody who's listening to this right now, if you have yet to play it, if you still have a PS3 or you have a PS4, whatever it is, I feel like until you don't play that game, you haven't done justice to your video game life.
I would, honest to God, put that in personally my top 10, like, of all time. And I'm throwing that up there with, Goldeneye. I'm throwing that up there with Mega Man X. I'm throwing that up there with Pac-Man and Tetris. Some of the iconic games in history. Yeah, The Last of Us was an amazing experience. I remember playing it on PS3, and the only reason I remember playing it was because a buddy of mine, he told me, you have to play this game. And he let me borrow his PlayStation 3. And he let me borrow it. He told me, keep it as long as you want until you're done with the game. And I beat the game, and I was in shock. It left me wanting more. It left me wanting more from the characters, from the story, from this world that I was immersed in. And then the music had me so captured. I was just in awe. I couldn't believe that I had this experience from sitting on my couch playing a video game.
Ironically, my introduction to it was very similar. I was at a buddy's house who keeps up with all the newest video games. But yeah, he's like, dude, you gotta try this game out. And to be very, very honest, I'm very against post-apocalyptic games. I just feel like almost every other game is post-apocalyptic, and I might get some backlash for this, but I just feel like it's just, you gotta survive, you gotta battle.
It's a very copy-paste kind of thing.
But The Last of Us, as they always say, is a big exception because it works on everything. Music, storytelling, characters, development, everything, the whole 9 yards. And, the ending is not exactly what everybody wants. It caused so much controversy. So,
I stand by it. It left me wanting more.
Speaking of more, what's the one game you're looking forward to coming out?
That's tough. E3 just finished last week.
Amazing graphics too, I gotta say. Looking at all those games, the graphics are just amazing.
E3 this year has a lot of good-looking things coming out in the next 2 years, give or take. Last of Us 2
definitely. That's
a definite. I'm looking forward to that. What else am I looking forward to?
They got the Uncharted Lost Legacy coming out.
Lost Legacy, that one looks really nice too. It's an interesting concept from another character in the franchise.
There's so much.
There's so many games that are coming out in the next 2 to 3 years that it's just it would be a whole other episode of this that we wouldn't just do gaming in general. We would just do video games in general.
Right. So anyway, guys, that's pretty much all the time that we have. We hope you enjoyed listening to this special edition of the Anything But Everything podcast. Thank you again so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.